Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Nazir daf Lamed, and we have been discussing the rules associated with a father having the ability to cause his son to become a Nazir. And we have two different opinions, whether that's just Lacha or Moshe Misinai. No, well, actually, these were Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi is a commentator that he lived in like the 11th or 12th century, 11th century, I think. So, but these are people from the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and so they lived several centuries earlier. And so here they had the following debate. So Yochanan said that it was halacha l'moshe misinai, and Reish Lakish says no, it's part of the educational process, and that's why a father has this ability to do this. So in any event, now we're going to shift slightly to talk about the father having, what happens if the father set aside funds. That's what we've been talking about for the last few days. And then he set aside funds for his korbanot. He was a Nazir. The father was a Nazir. Sets aside funds for the korbanot. Doesn't specify what they're going to be for, meaning which funds are going for the for which korban. And now, unfortunately, he passes away. And so the question is the son allowed to potentially use these funds for his own korbanot if he is or becomes a Nazir? And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And so let's take a look as we jump in. We're going to start with the Mishnah on the top of, or near 9 lines down from the top of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. And we say, Ha'ish migaleach, and again, migaleach means to shave, but here it really means to do the things that happen at the end of Nazirut, and one of those is to offer the korbanot. So Ha'ish migaleach al Nazirut aviv, that a son, a man can use the funds for the end korbanot based on the Nazirut of his father, but a woman does not have the ability to use. So the son has the ability, but the daughter does not. On Nazirut Aviyah. So Ketzad. So what are we talking about? Now, oddly, here in the end, we're going to actually be saying that this is a reverse, that this is going to be the case where you're not allowed to, that's going to be the first case. But let's take a look. And we're going to read this Mishnah and consistent with the Rush and Tosos. And the reason is because in the Gemara, we're going to cite a Baraisa. In our Mishnah, we're going to have just one opinion, Rabbi Yossi. That's going to be the only opinion in our Mishnah. And a Baraisa is going to have Rabbi Yossi's opinion as well. And we would like those two opinions. The Gemara does not ask why are they inconsistent. And so as a result, we are going to understand that this is, so therefore, the Rush and Tosos switch around the nusach of our Mishnah, the language of our Mishnah, in order to make them match. So we're going to read it in that sense. And if you want to follow along in the Hebrew, so you take a look in the Rush, if you see where it has in brackets Mem Tuf Nun Yud / that is the and then it says Hey Gimel for Hachik Garcinan. That is where we're going to follow. So if we follow along there, it says Ha'ish Megaleach al Niziros Aviv. That again, a son can shave based and bring the korbanot based on the Nazirut of his father, meaning using the unspecified funds that his father has left over because he passed away before he was able to use those funds. But she doesn't have the ability. His daughter does not have the ability. Ketzad Misha Hayahuva Aviv Nazir. If you have a son and a father who were both Nazirim, v'hifrish aviv ma'os stumim, and the father sets aside funds without specifying whether they're for any particular korban, but he specifies that they are for Naziruso, but they specify that here they are for his Nazirut, meaning the korbanot that one would bring at the end of the Nazirut. Rebbe Yossi, Hare Elu Yiplu L'Nadava. They go straight into the funds for voluntary offering. Namely, this is the special fund of voluntary to make voluntary offerings when the Mizbeach is not busy. And these are funds that all go to Ola offerings that are fully burnt to Hashem. She'ein zeh megalech al nazirus aviv, that this person, this son, is not able to use the funds of the father. So what and why not? So if we continue on in the rush again, left-hand column. Now dekevan de bechaye aviv nadar, because the son made the neder during the father's lifetime. V'hayu shneim chayavim korban, and both of them were obligated in the korban. So he was already obligated in the korbanot of Nazirut when his father died. So as a result, he can't now repurpose the funds of his father. That this is not where the halacha l'Moshe Misinai that we're going to see is the source of this has taught. And so as a result, that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So what is the situation? Again, the Mishnah is written in a slightly odd fashion in this read, and you can understand why the commentator, the language might have gotten confused, because the language that's written, literally written in the Mishnah, is the exact opposite. That somebody whose father was a Nazir and had funds, and then the son says that he's going to. Well, let's see the end of the Mishnah, and then we'll be able to say the reverse case. Okay, so what's the second case of the Mishnah? Again, continuing in the rush. Misha haya aviv Nazir, v'hayu lo mostumim. So now, if on the other hand you have somebody whose father was a Nazir and had set aside the funds for the various korbanot, but not specified which funds were for which korban, umes, and then he dies. V'amar habein, and now the son says, Hareini Nazir al manas she'egaleach al mos abba. I'm going to be a Nazir on the condition that I have the ability to use these funds for my shaving process, meaning for the offering of the korbanot associated with the end of my Nazirut. Zeo she'megaleach al mos abba. This is the person who's allowed to use the father's funds in order to engage in the shaving process. And so the Gemara will explain the reasoning. And so let's again, the literal reading, the literal language of our Mishnah is the exact opposite. That in the literal read of the Mishnah, the words that are printed in our Gemara say that actually, if the father was already alive, was already dead, and the son says, I want to use these funds, then it doesn't work. And if the father had not yet died, and the son and the father were both Nazirim at the same time, then it would work. And we'll see in the Gemara that the logic seems to go in the opposite direction. And so that also helps us understand why the Rush and Tosos all try to say that actually the language of our Mishnah is confused and it should be in reverse. So my time, so the Gemara now begins by wondering what's the reasoning of our Mishnah, namely, why do only sons have this right to use the funds of the father? So I'm Rabbi Yochanan halacha he ben Nazir. It's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. This is just something that Moshe taught the Jewish people. There is not necessarily a reason for it. It's just the way it is. Well, one second. Shita, 1 second. Maybe it should be obvious. My lememra de ben yorish es aviv ubas lo. Shouldn't we just say, listen, sons inherit, daughters do not inherit. Daughters get taken care of, but daughters don't inherit because they will eventually marry and become part of their husband's family, and all their assets will get transferred to their husband. So as a result, in general, daughters do not inherit. So no, that can't be the answer, because lo, tzuricha deleisle elabat. Well, what about the situation if the father only has daughters? If the only inheritor is the daughter, and you're saying that it's based on inheritance, well, then the daughter should be able to use those funds if she's the only descendant. So Mao Detema, Yorshin Gemirin law. So I might have thought that actually because of inheritance rules, she would be allowed to use the funds. So Kamash Malan la halacha, Kamash Malan halacha. So we say this halacha Lamoshe Misinai tells us that in fact that it's sons and not daughters, as the top Rashi or Meforish actually says in the left-hand column, the inner column, it says ben below bat. So only sons and not daughters have this benefit. And essentially, this is a benefit that effectively is not truly inheritance. It's because clearly there's a difference. So now that we've highlighted, because it doesn't apply to daughters, so now that we've highlighted this difference between inheritance and this ability to use one's deceased father's funds that were set aside for korbanot of a Nazirut. So are there other situations? So we're going to ask a question. So Ibailahu, Pligi Rabbanan Ale de Rebbe Yossi Olo Pligi. Oh no, so before we get to the questions, first we're going to ask, our Mishnah only mentioned Rebbe Yossi. Well, what about the rabbis? Do they agree or do they disagree? And so now we're going to quote the brisa that I mentioned earlier, and this explains why, again, they reversed the language in our Mishnah. So, do the rabbis agree or disagree? And if you say that they disagree, aresha o asefa, do they disagree with the beginning of our Mishnah? Meaning, in the beginning of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi said that if in fact they were both alive, then the son does not have the ability to use those funds because they both made the neder at the same time that he was already obligated, and so he can't use the funds. So are the rabbis disagreeing with that and saying even in that situation he is allowed to use the funds and forecast or to ruin the surprise? That is in fact what we will see, they say. Or do they argue about the end of the Mishnah? And the end of the Mishnah, that's where the Rebbe Yossi said that if the son survives the father, then and only after the father's death does the fund say, I want to become a Nazir on the condition that I use those funds. That's the only situation, according to Rebbe Yossi, where you can use it. And maybe the rabbis would disagree with that and say that, no, you can never use those funds. Or maybe there's some third circumstance where you could use the funds. So Tashma, come and let's listen to a brisa, and that will tell us the answer. So Kate said, Amru, Kaish Migalech on the Nazirus Aviv. What's the case where where a son can use his father's Nazirus funds? So Misha Haya Aviv Nazir, Vihifrish Aviv Maos Nazirus Umeis. So a father has set aside funds for Nazirut, and then he passes away. But Amar, and now the son says, Hareini Nazir Almanas Galech Almaos Haba. I'm becoming a Nazir on the condition that I can use those funds. So Zeu Shem Galech Almaos Aviv. That is the one who's allowed to use his father's funds for all the things associated with shaving, and in particular, we're referring to the korbanot. Aval, on the other hand, Misha Haya Huva Aviv Nazirim, if both of them are already Nazirim, the Hivrish Aviv Mos Nazirus Umes, and now the father sets aside money and dies. But those are the funds that have to go to the special voluntary offering that is used for when the altar is not busy. Divri Rebbe Yossi, that's what Rebbe Yossi says. So of course, that again is how we read the Mishnah. And that's again is why we did not read the Mishnah with the words that are literally written in our Gemara, because then our Mishnah would be the reverse of this. And we want the Brisa and the Mishnah to be consistent, since we're not going to ask, hey, it looks like Rebbe Yossi is disagreeing with himself in this brisa. So Divrei Rebbe Yossi. So that's what Rebbe Yossi say. So Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Meir, Rebbe Yehuda. So the other rabbis, and this constitutes the Rabbanan. Amru Zeu Shemegaleach Al Maos Aviv. No, that's the one who has the right. And the way we're understanding this is that the one who, even when the son is alive and the son has become a Nazir at the same time that the father is alive, even when they both are Nazirot, Nazirim, at the same time that they are that they're alive, even in that situation, you're allowed to, the son is allowed to use the funds. And so we see that they actually argue on just the end and not the beginning. Now, again, one could read this as saying that actually they disagree with both, but that does not seem to be how the Gemara is reading it. So, all right, so now we're going to have a series of 5 questions. We are not officially going to answer any of them, but we have the principle of imtim selomer, that sometimes we'll ask a question, and then we'll ask a question on one potential answer of that of the question, and we'll see exactly what I mean by that. And often, when that is the case, that is the way that the halacha will be. We'll follow that approach. All right, because otherwise, why would the Gemara ask for that further clarification? The further clarification would not be necessary if we don't go in that direction. So let's take a look at the questions, and then we will be finished with the 4th chapter of Maseches Nazir, and God willing, tomorrow we'll begin the 5th chapter. So let's take a look. So, by Rabba asks question number 1. Yesh lo shnei banim, and now again, this is all based on the concept that we said that there are similarities between this ability of a son to use the funds and inheritance, but they're not directly connected. Because if they were directly connected, if the daughter was alone, would be allowed to use the funds. So we know that it's not perfect, the correlation. But on the other hand, when we decide who gets it, is there some aspect of inheritance? So that's what Rabba is going to ask. Boy, Rabba, yesh lo shnei banim nazirim mahu. What happens if the father who set aside funds and then passed away had 2 sons who both said, I'm going to be a Nazir on the condition that I could use these funds for the karbanot when I'm shaving? So hilchas a gamirin law, do we say that the halacha l'moshe misinai kol dekadim galeach, that whoever comes first gets it, and that we just go based on time, and whoever needs it, or maybe whoever says that they're going to use it, they get to use it first? Odilma Yerusha Gamirin law. Or when we say that yes, it's only going to sons, but will follow the principles of inheritance. Upal Gahavi. And therefore, if you're going to follow the principles, then, and let's assume that these 2 sons, neither of them is the Bechor, and so because maybe the oldest is a daughter, so as a result, they'll each get half. So that's the question. So now, boy, Rabba asks, although it doesn't specifically make it explicit, it's implicit that, okay, let's assume that at least on some level, they're going to split it. So Bechor upashat mai. What happens if one of them is the eldest son, is the firstborn, and the other one is an ordinary son? Do we say hilchas a gamirin law? Do we say uvehilkach lo by galuche lefum mai deshakil? And therefore, everybody, therefore the firstborn does not get according to what he would have in a general inheritance situation, meaning that even if you say that we follow inheritance, do we follow inheritance such that the firstborn gets 50-50? Odilma Yerushahi. Or do we say, no, it's like a Yerusha, and therefore, v'chihechi d'shakal pishnayim. And so whenever the oldest, whenever the firstborn takes something, he gets double. So hachi megalech. And so as a result, so too, when he shaves his head, he'll get double. He'll get, if there are 2 sons, one the oldest, one the second, the oldest will get 2/3, and the youngest will get 1/3. So that ends up being as if he got double. So, and moreover, the imtim Yerusha, and if you want to say that it's like an inheritance, Yerusha that it's like an inheritance, ulfum d'shakel megaleach, and that really technically they should each get according to their proper inheritance. Maybe uvechulin hu de'islay pishnayim abal behektish lo. Maybe it is only when you inherit something that does not go straight to the Beit HaMikdash. But here, these funds, if they didn't go to the son's Nazir sacrifices, they would just go into a general fund of Ola Korbanot for the Mizbeach. And so as a result, it wouldn't be any kind of, there isn't any kind of special connection to it. And so maybe in that situation, the son does not get, the oldest son, the firstborn son, excuse me, does not get a double portion. He only gets a regular. Odilma keven dekane leiligiluach loshna. Or maybe because he's going to have some rights to the funds, maybe we would say that there's no difference and he should actually inherit. So based on these three questions, because the last two questions are going to change topic. Basically, because of the imtim selomer, assuming that it's going to be like Yerusha, the end result is that we would in fact split the funds if you have multiple sons who try to do this. So you would not, it would not be first come, first served, but rather you would actually split the funds. So now we come to the next topic. Avid Nazir Olam V'hu Nazir Stam. What happens if the nature of their Nazirut is different? Meaning, if the father is a Nazir that's going to be a Nazir for his entire life, and the son is a Nazir that is going to be a Nazir for a set period. Do we say, now you might be wondering, well, hey, how in the world does the Nazir Olam ever have funds for a Korban? Well, this thankfully for the notes here in the art scroll, because it reminds us that way back, near the very beginning of our Masechet, we learned that actually a Nazir Olam, somebody who becomes a Nazir forever, who is not a Nazir Shimshon, it has the right to occasionally, when the hair gets too heavy, to cut it. And as a result, when that happens, even though it is not technically the end of his Nazirut, he would bring the same sacrifices, the Chatas, the Ola, and the Shlamim. He would bring those same sacrifices that one would bring at the end. So maybe we can connect the two situations. And since it's the same sacrifices, we will allow the son to use those funds. Or alternatively, of Nazir Stam, Vuhu Nazir Olam. Or maybe what happens if the father was a Nazir Stam, meaning a set period, and then unfortunately he died after he set aside the Korbanot, but before he was able to bring them. So, and now the son is a Nazir Olam and has decided to be a permanent Nazir, but now his hair is getting too heavy for him and he needs a trim. And so as a result, he wants to use those funds for those Korbanot. So my Tigamirin Hilchasa Bestam Nazirus, was the halacha l'Moshe Sinai only in connection with a regular, a standard Nazir situation, or maybe there's no difference. And Tosos here, the second to last Tosos in this parak, second line of the wider lines near the bottom of the page, it says, Aviv Nazir Olam v'hu Nazir Stam. O Ibka, Ki Gemiri, or the opposite, meaning if the father is a Nazir Olam and the son's a Nazir Stam, or the son's a Nazir Olam and the father's a Nazir Stam. Oh, Ibcha, Ki Gemiri Hilchasa, when we learned that this halacha, the Stam Nazir, was it only in connection with the Stam Nazir? Umatzi mibai de'aviv v'hu Nazir Olam. And we could have potentially asked, well, maybe it would also apply if both of them are Nazir Olam, Shema, or maybe actually we could answer that really there's a reason the Gemara didn't ask the question about a Nazir Olam, meaning if what happens if both of them are Nazir Olam, because maybe Shema Hapshita, maybe this would be sufficiently obvious to Megalech that the son would be allowed to use the funds. Because in both situations, if the father was a Nazir Olam and he set aside the funds for his trim haircut, so then the son will also be able to use those funds, especially in the situation, according to Rabbi Yossi, where he specifically made his Nazirut conditioned on the ability to use those funds. Okay, so be'imtim zelomer hacha idi ve'idi nazirus taha. So, and if you say that in fact he is allowed to use it, and so as a result, the Rambam will say that in fact that is the case. That as long as they are both nazirim, it doesn't matter what kind of nazir they are. If they've got funds set aside for sacrifices, they can be used. Well, what about idi ve'idi nazirus tahara? That works when they're both tahor. So by Rav Ashi, Aviv Nazir Tame, Behu Nazir Tahor, Aviv Nazir Tahor, Behu Nazir Tame. What happens if the funds were set aside for the other kind of korbanot? Because remember importantly, that these korbanot are different. That the Nazir Tahor offers an ola, a chatas, and a shlamim. A Nazir Tameh, when they go through the tahara process and now become tahor again at the end, they offer the two birds, one as a chatas and one as an ola, and then they offer an asham, so which is not, and they don't offer a shlamim. So as a result, there's a difference between the two. So do we say that again? But the funds were not specified; they were just set aside for that group of korbanot. So do we say that because one was tahor and one is tameh, that they can't use it for one another? And so what's the halacha? Teku. We don't have an answer. And so as a result, in this last situation, we would not allow the son to use it. But the implication is that we would allow the sons to use the funds if both of them are the same situation. So if they were both Nazir Tameh or both Nazir Tahor, so then maybe we would allow the son to use it. So tomorrow, so Hadron Allah, Misha Amar, Hadron Allah, Misha Amar, Hadron Allah, Misha Amar. So, God be willing, we should have opportunities to learn this parak over and over again. But in the meantime, God willing, tomorrow we will start the fifth parak of Maseches Nazir, and we will address the following. What happens if someone became a Nazir based on a mistaken assumption? So they thought one thing, and they said that they were going to become a Nazir, and then it turns out they were mistaken. Well, for that, you're going to have to stay tuned to find out. So looking forward to, God willing, continuing our learning tomorrow. This was, Dov was able to get that Mishnah and some of the Gemara done beforehand, so it was a little bit shorter today, but God willing, we'll have a nice full day, God willing, tomorrow. Looking forward to our learning.
Yashikar.
Have a great day, everybody.
Yashikoyach, have a good day.
8:15. Yeah, it was the